It's story time! I am going to tell you a story about the worst vampire game I ever played in. This is in part because Sam McGurn asked nicely, and partly because there's a lesson in there. Probably more than one. Gather round, children. In this weird library. Why am I so big? Here is the setup. A friend of mine that I had gamed with many times was about to leave forever. Sidebar, he didn't, but that's the way of things. But we thought he was about to leave forever. So as a going away present, he wanted to run a game for us, and being gamers, we immediately said yes. The traditional pizza and soda and candy had been acquired, and we were sitting in my friend Ryan's apartment. In my memory, it's sort of like a big windowed place with a squishy white couch and some wicker furniture. But I have a feeling that the vagaries of time have snuck in there and smudged details. It's in the ballpark. So, the cast is thus. My friend Grant, who is going away and who is also the storyteller. Me. My friend Ryan. It's his apartment. My friend Bakir. And a young woman that we will call Susan, because I'm not in touch with her anymore, and so she can't call me on the phone and yell at me about whatever circle face I'm using for her. So there we go. Grant sits us down and says, all right, this is going to be a Dark Ages vampire game. You guys are going to play mortals who get embraced, so just go ahead and make a regular vampire character, and you just won't have your vampire stuff yet. Totally fine. I've done that a lot. I know how. So we go ahead and make characters. I make a Lasombra, just the sort of guy a Lasombra would embrace, an arrogant occultist and alchemist who thinks he knows what the world is about and needs to be taught a lesson by evil shadow vampires. Great. Ryan made a Ventru, who presumably was taken from the local stock of politicians or politically important people. Bakir, very true to form, made a Gangrel, who was also a hunter and a trapper. I think Susan made, I forget her clan, I want to say she made a Toreador or a Malkavian. It doesn't matter. You'll find out why. Real quick aside. If you've never played Vampire, that's fine. It's a skill and attribute-based system. You add your stuff together to make dice pools, and a clan is basically like your vampire's class. Okay, you're caught up. We sit down, and Grant begins the game. So we're all in a small town in Dark Ages Germany, attending a traveling circus. Attending a traveling circus. Were there traveling circuses in the Dark Ages? I believe there were not, but that's okay, because the thing that he was describing was more like a traveling carnival. Were there traveling carnivals in the Dark Ages? Also, probably no, but there were like traveling theater troupes, and I'm sure there were lots of things similar to traveling carnivals in the Dark Ages. And also, this is the premise for the game, so we just roll with it. He begins to describe the entry into the carnival with its massive tense and curious but hapless crowds, ourselves included. I should have known something was going to go a little weird when he described a woman sitting on the side post we were entering through as having one titty out. But you need to remember, this all took place in the 2000s. It was a weird time. Like, there were no smartphones. There was no social media. There was no Wi-Fi, y'all. Go take a look at some of the media released in 2000, and you'll be like, okay, that was weird. Anyway, we enter the carnival, and what follows can only be described as extended tedium. He goes around the table and asks us one after another what we want to do. And we would quite reasonably say, what is there to do? And he would describe a series of acts and attractions that were part of this place, such as a snake lady who sat in a pit with vipers, or a fortune teller, or a pair of conjoined twins. I'm certain he called them Siamese twins, but basically everybody did back then. And we would say stuff like, yeah, I want to go see the snake lady, or I'll go talk to the fortune teller, or whatever. And invariably, we would get a very curious response. He'd say something like, you do? Oh, okay. And then he'd seemingly make something up on the spot, but ultimately it wasn't anything that couldn't have been replaced with the words, it's just a carnival attraction. Before we go ahead with the next bit, here's a thing that you need to understand about the Vampire line of games. They're not like other games you play, right? If you're playing D&D, usually you're playing, I think, in probably the default setting of whatever the player's handbook is. That's not really a setting. It's sort of Faerun flavored, but there's not really a setting baked into that. But you could be playing in a specific setting. You could be playing in Faerun or Greyhawk or Tal'Dorei, whatever. You get it. But your game is nothing to do with my game. It's nothing to do with any other game. Draw Steel is exactly the same way. I think right now most players are playing in some variation of Orden, not my players, but most players. But your version of Orden only exists to give you a framework in which to run the game. The actual lore isn't really that important. You can change whatever you want. You don't need to care. Like, if you are not running Saltmarsh or Crack the Sun or whatever, those things just didn't happen in your setting, and that's fine. Not everything happens in every setting. Vampire is not like that. Vampire has an established setting. That setting is the world of darkness, which is basically the real world, but scarier. The real world, but differently scary. Magically scary. Magically scary. And there's really only one. You can run in a weird fantasy setting. There's nothing stopping you. But part of the draw of the game is that it has not only one setting, but one meta plot. That is, one overarching plot. The game is about something that is happening. And every time new books or new material come out in the game, it progresses that plot forward a little bit. It's not the first game that did this, but I think it may have done it the biggest. Or rather, I think it may have done it the biggest if you ignore 40K. But it's that same kind of idea. It's one story. It has a beginning and an end. It starts with Cain and Lilith and the Triad and the earliest awakened beings, and it ends with the apocalypse and the reality wars and the end times of vampires and the oldest vampires rising and consuming us all, and the party's over. The world of darkness is full of mysteries. That's the appeal. Not just mysteries that your character doesn't know the answer to, like why do vampires drink blood or who's killing hobos at the dock, but mysteries that you as a player and as a fan of these games don't know, like what happened to Cappadocius, who was responsible for the fall of Carthage, or is Sam Haight really going to stay an ashtray forever? In that era, you as a fan of these games wanted to know the answers to these questions. And those questions did have correct answers. That was the appeal. As the game line went on for years and years and years and years, and more supplements and splat books and lore books and bullshit came out, those questions were answered. Every time a new clan book came out, you learned a little more about the creation of that clan and what it was about, and you learned some of their secrets, and you got some answers. And sometimes those answers conflicted with each other, and that's just the nature of occultism, but there were answers to these questions, and a big draw for a lot of gamers, not even necessarily people playing this game, were those answers. Now, if you were anything resembling a good role player, your character didn't know all those answers that you knew, though that didn't stop everyone. But you knew a lot. And a lot of people read those books and talked about those books a lot more, sometimes 100% more, than they played the game. The big downside to this is that you developed very clear opinions about what the game should look like, when and how certain things happened, because there were answers, right? And the stat blocks of various famous NPCs in the setting gave you a rough idea of what the power level of the average vampire was, be they a fresh embrace or a centuries-old elder. In other words, you knew what lots of XP on a sheet looked like. In the same way, you would know that an NPC who just cast 3 wish spells was a stupidly powerful magic user, or if somebody just jumped 20 squares and then pushed everyone in a 5 burst 10 squares away, they're probably a powerful fury. You can make educated guesses because you are good at understanding how the game works and the lore of the game. I told you that so I can tell you this. It became apparent pretty early on that we are basically in some version of the Midnight Circus, but with all the serial numbers filed off. The Midnight Circus was a really popular and generally overpowered White Wolf supplement that had a totally neat, if awkwardly messy story of like a traveling carnival, very much like this one, but with vampires and mages and werewolves and things, and it took place way later than the Dark Ages, I think 1865, something like that. There would have been a version of that circus that existed in the Dark Ages. It wasn't like this, but whatever. This is a one-shot. You forgive these things. Plus, we're just a bunch of human visitors anyway, right? So no big deal. We don't know anything. The fact that I recognized it doesn't mean my character did. And it seemed clear to us that the plan was for the folks in the carnival to embrace us. And while that does feel a little contrived to like pick us out of the crowd, it wouldn't have felt totally stupid because we were all basically perfect choices for the embrace by our various clans. So it would be trivial to say, well, someone looks around in your head and, they give you off to the right people. Fine. Except, look, We've been at this as gamers for like 3 hours now. And at this point, Ryan's partner comes down and says, guys, look, I know you're having fun. We were not. But I have to work tomorrow and you're very loud. Can you pick this up another time? That's a reasonable request since she was used to all our gaming stopping at like 10 and it was 11:30. She's a lovely woman. But we couldn't pick it up next time because we incorrectly assumed that Grant was going away forever the next day. What to do? Well, we packed everybody up and moved to my place, of course. Everybody playing already lived at my place, so we weren't keeping anyone up. We got everybody at my dining room table in my little apartment, and we continued. So our characters filter into this dark tent. Now is when he remembers to tell us it's dark out. It's not clear whether it was dark the whole time or whether it had just now gotten dark, whatever. And a seer comes out and asks if anyone in the audience wants to have their futures read. And he talks about how some hands go up, and of course I put my hand up. Of course I do. I'm playing an occultist. You can not get your future read in any game, right? And he seemed legitimately shocked by this turn of events. Now, you need to bear in mind, this one act of putting my hand up so far was the most interactive thing that's happened in the 3+ hours that we've been gaming. This is the first time we've been able to do anything. And I shit you not, this guy comes out and looks at my palm, and then Grant says, he says some spooky, mind-blowing shit. What? At which point the tent is attacked by vampires. Real quick aside, because I'm not going to get to this later, that was a wasted opportunity, right? If nothing else, he should have looked at my palm and been like, you're about to be attacked by vampires. That would have blown my mind. Okay, whatever. So maybe now we're going to get down to it. These vampires will destroy the weird hedge wizards and maybe take us off, and we'll get parceled out for the embrace. That's a bit convenient, but, you know, we're 4.5 hours in now, and I would be happy to be led wherever we're going to go, as long as we go somewhere. But that isn't what happened. Because the carnival is also full of vampires. What time was it when we got here again? Doesn't matter. So these two groups began fighting one another, and to be clear, we have basically no idea who these NPCs are on either side. Right? They've sort of been described as this one guy or that snake lady, but we don't know them. We've barely talked to them. We have no stake in this particular fight. It also becomes immediately clear that these vampires all have something like 300 or 400 points worth of disciplines. They're throwing around 6 or 8 knives in an instant, and they're moving so fast we can't track them, and they're all deploying weird magic, and they're conjuring fire and flowing through the earth and mass dominating folks in the audience and one another. And most importantly, it was a ton of physical disciplines, seemingly regardless of clan. If you have played a lot of Vampire, you know the type. If you've played a lot of D&D, I want you to imagine 2 armies fighting, but everyone on both sides are wearing full plate armor and throwing fireballs regardless of class. It's like that. And the thing is, we can do nothing of value here. We tried because we're PCs and we signed up to do something, but instead, it's a lot of something happening around us. And to be clear, we are moving in rounds here, people. This isn't just narrative. We're going round by round, despite the fact that our actions are like, I throw a chair at him. And then when nothing happens, we just go hide behind someone. At this point, we've lost Susan. She's like, hey, it's 2 a.m. I'm out. She lives here, so she just goes to bed and takes the dog with her. Did I forget to tell you there was a dog? There was a dog. It was a cute dog. So now it's a dog-free sausage party, and we get back into it. Grant tells us that one by one, we are captured or knocked unconscious by the attackers. Okay, fine. In for a penny, in for a pound. We wake up in a barn, and we're vampires. Us and like 30 other people from the crowd, we've been mass embraced. Now, is the mass embrace a thing that commonly happened in the Dark Ages? It is not. That's the whole point of the Dark Ages, actually. That's why we made our sheets like that. A mass embrace, for those of you who don't know, means that you knock out a few dozen people and then a bunch of random vampires all chuck blood at them so that the distribution of clans, again, sort of like a class, should be pretty random. The idea that we all just accidentally fell into the perfect clan for our character concepts felt awkward, cringe even, before cringe was a thing. But again, gamers will follow you very far for one session. So we wake up starving in a barn, And then this awesome vampire comes into the room. I don't remember the exact description, so you can just picture him as having a trench coat and dual katanas. That was the vibe. And he told us that we had all been made into vampires and that now we are in the Sabbat. Now, if you know anything about vampire, probably a big screeching brake sound just happened in your head, or possibly a record scratch, because was there a Sabbat in the Dark Ages? There was not. That's what I mean, that there's right and wrong answers to these things. Not only was there not a Sabbat in the Dark Ages, there wasn't a Camarilla in the Dark Ages. There were barely anarch revolts in the Dark Ages. That's what defines the Dark Ages as separate from the modern era. It's not just whether or not there's penicillin. So my inner vampire fan, and I need you to understand that I basically played this game full time back then. I ran a LARP, I played in 2 more. My inner vampire fan was desperately trying to drag me out of the room, but whatever. I played along because I am first and foremost a role player, and I can run with the information that my character has been given, even if that information is stupid. So then Trenchcoat Katana Hand says, go into the next room and feed like a proper kindred, despite the fact that he probably should have said K-Knight, whatever. So we go into the next room, and I need you to understand that I am not making this up, because I am not clever to make this shit up. He says, yeah, you guys go into the next room, and there's like, it's a stable, but there's no horses or anything, but there's like a bunch of naked nuns chained up to the walls, and you're like really hungry. And so after Ryan and Bakir and I finish looking across the table at one another, as if wondering which of us is going to say it first, I say, Grant, if they're naked, how can we tell they're nuns? And like, hands to the baby Horace, he says, I don't know, they left their hats on or something. At this point, I have checked all the way out. I say, yeah, I guess I'm going to kill and eat a nun, and Bakir does the same. But my friend Ryan says, well, I guess I'm going home now. Bye, guys. Not him, his character. Ryan is the sort of role player who keeps all his out-of-character shit very close to the chest. I love that. So he goes to leave. And like, there's a guard there who doesn't want to let him leave, but Ryan's playing a Ventrue, so he dominates that guy and heads outside. That's what he made. He built a character just for that. So now Grant is in a panic because he legitimately doesn't know what to do here. Like, he's baffled that a player might want to do something that he didn't plan for, despite the fact that I legitimately don't think he planned anything. And straight up, he just sort of stutters while Ryan's character starts walking home rather than eat nuns. Now, some of you might be thinking that's weird or silly or confrontational, but some of you saw it immediately, especially if you play a reasonable amount of Vampire. Probably only if you play a reasonable amount of Vampire. Because Ryan made a Ventrue, and the thing about Ventrue in the World of Darkness is that they have very specific tastes. They literally cannot drink blood from just anyone. There's only a specific type of blood they can drink. In Ryan's case, he has to drink the blood of his subjects. And there are none of them in this barn. He literally can't eat naked nuns. And I should point out, I do feel like I've lived a fortunate life because I am able to say that sentence out loud. And eventually, Grant's like, okay, but I sort of need you to head back to the castle for the next part. Let's just pretend one of the nuns is from your city or whatever. And Ryan politely agrees that he'll just head back to the castle, justifying it by saying it's too far for him to walk back home before dawn. That's his invention, not Grant's, but whatever. So we go back to the castle. But y'all, by now it's almost 5 a.m. I am deeply sick to my stomach from having finished off a lot of the pizza and a whole lot of the candy. And some of us have to wake up early to call off work tomorrow. So we're like, Grant, how about you just talk us through the rest? Because it's pretty clear at this point, we're not getting to the end of the game. Okay, so here's what we got. The recap. There's this group of Sabbat vampires. Again, not a thing, but whatever. And they want to attack this elder. So they mass embrace a bunch of vampires, and we were all going to assault this castle on an island. Now remember, we're in Germany. He didn't say which island, but he did say it was a small island. I like Amrum for this, but I think that would have been part of Denmark at the time, wouldn't it? So like Pool or Borkum. Let's pretend it was Borkum. Again, it doesn't matter. So we were all to go to this castle and have a big fight, and I need you to remember that fights in Vampire take significantly longer than they do in even Draw Steel or D&D, because It's just not a game designed for fights. In that it has mechanics for fights, but those mechanics are pretty bad. Just, that fight would have just taken us all night. And then, at the end of the fight, the castle collapses on us, and we all get smushed, and we fall into torpor, which is like a stasis for vampires. We fall into torpor, and when we wake up, and again, may the Morrigan strike me down if I'm lying, when we wake up, we are in modern-day New York. And then he says something that is almost as haunting as the line about naked nuns. He says, anyway, that's when the real game part of it was supposed to start. Why go? And boys and girls, that is when we packed it in for the night. So long. Thanks for the game. See you around. Good luck in LA where you will never go. Let's talk about the lessons. Now, over the years, I have played in some bad World of Darkness games, but none that were this bad. It wasn't just the complete disregard for the lore. Heck, one of my favorite games was when they turned the Convention of Thorns into this grand supernatural melee and I was killed in a lake of holy water. That was stupid, but it was fun. I ran a game where a dwarf gangrel got enchanted boots of nut kicking from the Fae. Sorry, boy. He's only fucking dead. That was stupid, but it was fun. And I've played in plenty of games that were super by the book and stuck to the lore and were boring as hell. Because honestly, in a well-run vampire city, not that much happens. Problems flow up from the officers to the prince, and then they are dealt with swiftly, either by killing them or hiding till they go away. That's how vampires deal with stuff. It's clean, but it's boring. What made this so uniquely bad is a collection of stuff, and I think we can learn something from it. The biggest lesson is what should have happened. And if you've been running games for any length of time, you can probably see this right away. What should have happened is this. Okay, now that you've made your characters, it's time for the twist. In the year 1204, you were all sent by your various lords and sires to attack a small castle on an island in northern Germany. During the fighting, the castle collapsed, and you were buried under millions of pounds of rubble that dropped you into torpor. Tonight, you woke as blood from above began to trickle down into the earth that holds you. As you rise, you claw your way to the surface, more beast than man, and you're struck by blinding lights from the bridge above you. By incredible lights, bright enough to challenge the sun, and incredible noise, the noises of cars rumbling past overhead, the sounds of horns and yells and sirens in the distance. The year is 1982, and you are standing under a bridge in the Bronx. Now, I gotta tell you, that would capture my imagination, and if you want your game to be a one-shot about elders rising from torpor in modern New York, that's how you start it. Because that's what the game is about. The lesson here is easy. Get to the fucking monkey. Get to the fucking monkey! If you haven't heard, that's a Tripod song about how the King Kong movie was too long and we spent too much time with no monkey. Just get to the fucking monkey. In other words, get to the point. Okay, so that's thing one. There's other lessons, of course. For example, if you're going to run in a setting as complicated as the World of Darkness, you probably owe it to yourself to at least know the basics. I'm not saying you need to know the name of every prince of every major city where every clan stronghold is, but the big stuff, like whether there's a Sabbat in the Dark Ages, that is a thing that is covered in the first 2 pages in the Dark Ages book, possibly the first paragraph. I don't know, it's been a while since I read it, but the point is the setting is just a shorthand. A setting is just a shorthand version of you handing a setting document to your players, or a thing you do in lieu of handing a setting document to your players. If I say we're playing in Orton, but then Elminster shows up and suddenly you're fighting Tiamat and Asarerak and Cobra Commander is there, my players are going to feel like I'm not delivering on the premise. If that was my plan, I should have said so. Because if I said, hey guys, we're going to play in this fucking bonkers campaign setting where Cobra serves Tiamat and they're fighting for control of the world against Asarerak and you guys get to stop them, my players will be like, fuck yeah. And they will be into it. The ones that agree to play will be into it. In other words, don't let your players make Lord of the Rings characters if you are running a Monty Python and the Holy Grail game. Counterpoint, do not let your players make Monty Python and the Holy Grail characters if you are running a Lord of the Rings game. Counterpoint, Lord of the Rings is not actually a very good role-playing game. Like, the Lord of the Rings role-playing game is good, but that story is not a good role-playing game. Don't do that. Those dudes get no treasure. And finally, and I cannot stress this enough, the fewer times you have to say the word titties in your game, the better. The end. Okay, now everyone, tuck in, close your eyes, go to sleep. Story time is over. Remember the rule of bedtime. If you can't sleep yet, just rest your eyes.